Welcome everyone, Costin here with my campaign overview guide for Volkmar the Grim in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. Volkmar has one of the most difficult campaign starts in the entire game. Late game potential or even mid game potential, he is very powerful, but early game he is going to have a significant number of issues to deal with. One of those issues is the Empire itself as a race, as a faction, if you will. The Empire isn't a strong race early game. Their strength comes from their late game artillery, hellstorms, great cannons, siege tanks, demigryphs, great swords, huntsmen, etc. But early on, they are in a troubled spot. And this is especially the case for Volkmar because he starts with Sundenberg and he will also gain the Plain of Tuskers on turn 1. Now the problem with these two regions is that they are port regions, and port regions just have a limited amount of income. Yes, you get some growth as a trade-off, but generating only 100 extra income from a port settlement is obviously going to be a limitation on your campaign. Furthermore, the units of the Empire early on, archers, which by the way are a DLC unit, or free company militias, swordsmen, spearmen, they aren't particularly the best to tackle the issues that you are going to be facing. And while many Imperial units early game are very cheap to recruit, they're not so cheap to maintain on the campaign map, which creates further issues. My advice is to go with the combination of archers and free company militias, specifically because Volkmar buffs free company militias in order to deal with the issue, with the threats that you have in a campaign. Specifically, massing archers seems to work especially well. Now let's talk a bit about Volkmar's campaign situation. He does get the cooldown benefit to battle prayers and accusation as an ability, which is a witch hunter ability. He gets a bonus to infantry versus infantry for flagellants, Empire Knights, and free company militia. And he can also collect the books of Nagash. Lord skill-wise, he gets the Grand Theogonist, which gives him control in a province, physical resistance for those units, the flagellants, Empire Knights, and free company militias, which is pretty bad because outside of the free company militias, these are not really units you would want to use in a campaign. His Lord skill-wise is a different discussion. Specifically, getting the Grand Soulfire very early on in the campaign can really help you in a lot of battles. But, of course, that means you're not necessarily going to get Pistol Core and the benefits to range that you do need early on in the game. Though Grand Soulfire can help you make up for that to a large extent. The biggest problem, beyond the economy, beyond the army roster, and the starting province, the biggest problem is the factions he has to deal with. So he does have the Dune Kingdoms early on that he starts at war with, and he can easily sweep them aside. This is also a faction that Manfred von Karstein starts at war with as well. But here's where we get into the problem. So you take the Plain of Tuskers, you eliminate this army. What do you do next? Well, you move to the edge of this province and turn 2 and you recruit more units. You might also benefit from recruiting a Lord, a General of the Empire, or an Archlector even better, though one that has good traits. So in this case, the one I'd probably go for would actually be the Huntsman General, though obviously the Huntsman General are not the best the fighters in a battle, but the trait here that he has is the best. You might start this campaign several times to get an Archlector with good traits. You might recruit a Lord and just start global recruitment over here. So for instance, let's say I get I get a Huntsman General, and I'm going to get some archers globally recruited, so that by the end of turn 2, the beginning of turn 3, I'll have 3 additional units here. Of course, that means you're going to be spending a lot of your early game income to achieve this. On turn 3, you take Bagar, or you encounter Manfred, who might have taken Bagar himself. This is where we get into the first issue. Manfred. Manfred is going to throw at least a full stack against you, maybe even 2 full stacks against you very early on in a campaign. And the most logical path in your campaign is to go after Manfred. Any other choice is not as good. If you ignore Manfred, you're just setting up yourself for a world of pain. But if you do take on Manfred, then you encounter the Bowmen of Orion, you encounter Forik, you encounter Cetra, all of which can declare war on you. Fork the least, because the dwarves can get along very well with the Empire, but don't be surprised if you end up in a war with Fork. The bigger issue, however, is that even if you do win Manfred, which by the way is by no means an easy fight, you still have the Wood Elves over here in Orient's camp, and you have Tic-Tac-Toe. Tic-Tac-Toe is one of those factions which is very aggressive against you in a campaign. You do start with a non-aggression pact, be prepared for him to violate it. One of the best things you could possibly do in this campaign is pay him 1,000 gold from turn 1 and get the trade agreement. The more diplomatic agreements you have with a particular faction, the less likely they're to declare war on you. You are going to end up in a war with Tic-Tac-Toe. That is a given. But the more you can delay that war, the better off you'll be. What you really need, playing as Volkmar, is time. Time to deal with Manfred, time to establish your empire, time to expand. So let's say you do win against Manfred. The best situation is to catch him off guard when he's already taken a settlement, so his army has been weakened. So if he's just taken Bagar, that might be the point where you want to strike, or you might want to wait until he's taken Antok or is threatening it before you do attack his army. You might even get a peace deal with the Dune Kingdoms, a temporary peace deal, to just gang up on Manfred. He's that big of a threat. Now, Kasabar, Bagar, and Nantok are good regions. Bagar and Kasabar in particular, because they have gemstones, and there's a special structure over here in Kasabar that you can benefit greatly from. What do you do after? Well, even if you do win in Bagar and Kasabar and you take Antok, you still have the vampire counts here in the Springs of Eternal Life. That may very well declare war on you. You might wish to take them out just to get some deals with Cetra. While Cetra does have a great province, you don't want to expand northward just yet, because you don't want to be dealing with Skarbrand early on in the campaign, on top of every other issue that you will be facing during the course of this campaign. So it's in your best interest, if possible, to make a deal with Cetra. Instead, once you've dealt with Manfred, and if you're not in a war with Tic-Tac-Toe, what you should do is head north to the Cracked Land. Now, if you do end up in a war with Tic-Tac-Toe, alright, go ahead, take him out, or you might want to go into the central jungles to deal with the Greenskins here. Because if you want a trade agreement with Tic-Tac-Toe, the best thing you can do is do something like this: declare war against the Leaf Cutters. Now, Tic-Tac-Toe will do good against them, but if you ignore them, they might just go and threaten Antok. So you might be tempted to go into the south and take the central jungles. Though I think this is a horrible plan in multiple ways. Though you might be forced to do it, or you might be forced to send a second army to help hold Antok from a Greenskin counterattack if you do decide to make that trade agreement. The pros of the trade agreement would be that Tic-Tac-Toe is going to take more time to declare war on you. It's going to happen regardless at one point or another. But the downside is, of course, you end up in a war with the Greenskins, which can also very likely happen in the campaign. Your best bet is to take the Cracked Land once you've dealt with Manfred, take the Great Desert of Araby, and then march on Arkhan. Take Arkhan out, take his entire province out. Arkhan is a brutal fight, but you may also have Rapunzel by this point helping you out against him, and you can certainly make deals with her. Though if you've taken the Cracked Land, you might actually want to march further north to deal with Arkhan and take his territory, if you can get the military access with Rapunzel. There's a lot of choices, and there's a lot of ways that this situation can go south early on in the campaign. I've done videos on this. I'll link one of those videos at the end of this one. What do you do after? Let's assume you do take the Cracked Lands, you've taken the Shifting Sands, you've taken the Land of Assassins, and you have the Great Desert of Araby. Now, in an ideal world, you would keep up the Great Desert of Araby, though keeping control of it can be a bit of an issue. You may sell it to Rapunzel, you may sell it to the Dwarves for military alliances with either of them, and they can help secure your northern flank from Sartosa and other issues. What's your next step? Well, you may wish to take the Black Pyramid of Nagash, and you may want to secure your first book of Nagash, and then turn on Cetra. You shouldn't necessarily make diplomatic deals with Cetra unless you end up in a war with Tic-Tac-Toe very early on. Then you might want to make that deal with Cetra. You could head north, or you could head south to secure the jungles for yourself until you encounter Teclis and the Slytherin faction, which is going to have deals with Teclis. You could eliminate Krokar and march here along the coast. Take this entire territory for yourself. Those are your choices. There's many choices, many different paths. Hell, you could just take Araby for yourself, march on Sartosa, take the western border and princes, and get an economic power base for the sake of your empire. Now let's talk a bit about the Books of Nagash, because the main benefit of Volkmar's campaign is that he can get the Books of Nagash with the various benefits that they provide. So casualty replenishment for the one closest to me, hero capacity for warrior priests and witch hunters, cooldown to battle prayers on top of the cooldown you already have, attrition to enemy armies within your territory, character experience gain, leadership. Though I would say the books themselves aren't necessarily the most substantial benefits. What is more substantial, though, is with each book you get a zeal. And the zeal will unlock Elector State Troopers, as well as various items. So, for instance, with one zeal you get Mother's Reign, you get Eldred's Guards, which are the best spearmen with shields in the game, far superior to the regular spearmen with shields. They're worth it because they have high armor. They're going to add a lot of value to your army. So getting at least one book from the rogue army that's here might very well be worth it. And the more you get, the more upkeep costs for Elector Count State Troopers you get. So you want to get the Books of Nagash. Though it's worth bearing in mind that the effects of the books are randomized. So one of the books, the book that you probably want the most would probably be the 8th book of Nagash. That seems to provide the biggest benefits. Though, of course, that 8% casualty replenishment rate that the 4th book has is also something that shouldn't be ignored. I'd say the 4th and 8th books are the most valuable in your campaign, and you do want to secure them. The problem is that you need to actually take the territory yourself. For Lamia is not really an issue, but there's certainly issues with the books in Caracate Peaks, or the books in certain other territories like Skaven Blight, or if we look at the 8th book of Nagash, the White Tower of Hoeth, which Tyrion will have in this campaign. Good luck getting the 8th book of Nagash over here. Some are held by Rogan armies, some are held in settlements. Now, you should be able to take Caracate Peaks yourself without too many issues and gain significant benefits. The more books you get, the more electro troops you get, the more ancillaries you get. But then eventually you start getting ward save, up to 15% ward save if you can get all the books. This is the thing that adds a lot of value to Volkmar's campaign, that he gets all the state troops, pretty much all the items, I believe, and he gets that 15% ward save. So late on in the game, he is going to be significantly more powerful. What should be your late game strategy? Well, your victory conditions require you to deal with Sinch and the Drakenhof Conclave. So you might want to go south just to ensure Kairos' defeat, because Kairos can actually beat both Oxyotl and Teclis. Or he may not beat Teclis, but he can certainly put him on the back foot. So you might be forced to send armies down there to achieve your short-term campaign victory condition, which gives you free hero capacity to all heroes. So mages, warrior priests, captains in particular, all being very valuable. I'd say warrior priests in particular are the most valuable to get. And then with the long campaign victory conditions, which basically force you to take over the empire, you get hero recruit rank plus 10. So it's worth doing. So your eventual goal in this campaign, once you've secured Araby as well as Khemri, or maybe a portion of Khemri, is to move north. You can take the entirety of this map with the exception of the mountains. You can leave the dwarves, the stalwart dwarves, as allies if you can get those alliances. You're likely going to end up in a war with Krakar, with Tic-Tac-Toe, and maybe even the lizardmen over here in the southern jungles, which might actually lead to a war with Teclis if you're not careful about handling that. Just be aware of it. Just be careful if you do decide to declare war on Krakar in particular, because he can get contact with them, make deals with them, and those lizardmen over here can have really good relations with Teclis from turn 1. And Teclis might make an alliance with Krakar. And you don't want to fight Teclis in your campaign, by the way, when you have to also deal with Kairos. Eventually you move north. The empire should stabilize itself by the time you arrive there. But if Vlad is still out there, take southern Sylvania, take Zufbar, maybe give it to the dwarves in return for good diplomatic relations, and just stabilize the empire as much as you can. The best bet in your campaign is to take the western border princes for the major economic benefits. Take Tylea, take the eastern border princes. That can form the core of your empire past Araby and Kemri. And what you do beyond that is your choice. You could head over to Lustra if you want to conquer it, but the late game isn't the issue. The issue in this campaign is really about the early game and the early game choices you have, because you have Manfred, you have Cetra, you have Tic-Tac-Toe, you have Arkhan, you have Rapance, you have Forik, you have a lot of neighbors, many of which can and will declare war against you. And that's all there is to know about this campaign. I genuinely think it's a miserable experience. Your starting army is not particularly great. You should use the great swords, the handgunners, the crossbows, and maybe even the Imperial Knights to counter Manfred. It's worth knowing that Manfred has 2 really good cavalry units, and he personally is really good in battle as well. Though most of his units are going to be made up of skeletal spearmen, warriors, and zombies, and Volkmar is very well suited to dealing with that. He's got a good amount of durability, good amount of AoE damage that you can use to your advantage. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, enable notifications, and I'll see you boys and girls next time.